How does Priestley explore responsibility in An Inspector Calls? Write about the ideas about responsibility in An Inspector Calls, how Priestley presents these ideas by the way he writes. Priestley explores responsibility through the character of Arthur Burling. Mr. Burling is presented as a prestigious man whom sees his life as an honourable feat. As a self-made man, he disregards the working class and casts them away. This can be seen when Burling denies responsibility for the death of Eva Smith. Throughout the play, he is adamant about the fact that it isn't his fault. However, it appears he is more concerned for himself than the girl's personal well-being. Rather than showing compassion for her, he looks at his own position in the situation. He worries about himself more than the death of the girl, so much so that he even tries to pay the inspector off in Act 3, to which the inspector explains to Mr. Burling that it's too late for that now. This is, of course, a reference to how Mr. Burling had denied Eva's money at the start of the play. Mr. Burling only wants to give money now as it's in his best of interests. He only cares to be open and express himself if it helps him. Notably, prior to the inspector's visit, Mr. Burling is far more open, boasting about the port he has and how he is to be knighted. He will only take responsibility for his good deeds and accomplishments, but denies the existence of any flaws. Interestingly, the inspector dissects Mr. Burling and shows his true colours and corrupt ambitions. As a socialist in the 1940s, Priestley may have shown this contrast between Burling's public and private self to demonstrate to the audience that the middle class do have weaknesses. They just don't take responsibility and won't admit them. As the audience sees this change unveil, they will begin to consider whether they take responsibility. Perhaps they are a middle-class man themselves and relate to Mr. Burling's insecurities. As they begin to see him show himself as an unlikable character, they may consider whether they too need to take responsibility and admit to their misdeeds. By doing this, they are avoiding being like Mr. Burling. Priestley explores responsibility through Sheila's acceptance of what she has done. Unlike her father and mother, Sheila shows a level of compassion for Eva Smith's death, saying that it's horrible. Unlike Mr. Burling, she keeps this frame of mind, even after discussing her own involvement in the incident. Rather than denying the truth, she accepts what she has done and admits it was wrong. Notably, the audience will see this clear contrast between the father and daughter, due to Mr. Burling being dissected just prior. By attacking Mr. Burling first, and then Sheila, the audience will suddenly realize the divide between the two. As a socialist, Priestley may have done this to demonstrate that not every middle-class citizen is the same. Interestingly, the key difference between the two is age. Burling, a man of the older generation, denied his responsibility to the case. He cared more for his own status than the life of Eva Smith. Comparatively, Sheila accepted what she has done, despite not being happy about it. She doesn't focus on her own life. She, instead, shows a clear compassion for Eva, despite not knowing her prior. Perhaps this could suggest that Sheila shows the same compassion for the whole working class. She doesn't focus on Eva being a stranger, she focuses on Eva being a human being. She doesn't class her as lower than her, she sees her as an equal and takes responsibility for harming her equal. This key difference to Mr. Burling may have been done so that Priestley can demonstrate the outdated antics of the older generation. As the play is set in 1912, the audience of the 1940s may begin to consider whether change has come around through the older generation becoming deceased. They may consider their own lives and how the younger generation's views have affected them personally. They may look to Sheila for inspiration and try and replicate her views in the world. If an audience member works for the government, they may bring forward the idea that the younger generation's views should be considered more often. Priestley explores responsibility through the never-ending cycle of Eva Smith's death. Towards the end of the play, Mr. Burling, Mrs. Burling, and Gerald all constantly try and get out of the situation. They are successful, after they discover that no Inspector Gould existed, and that he has had them. They ignore the inspector's message and ambitions, instead looking for a way out and a way to avoid responsibility for their actions. However, the play ends when the family receives a phone call, explaining how a girl has committed suicide and that an inspector is going to come back once more. This report could signify the idea that the Burlings didn't accept that they had what they had done. Throughout the play, they never once take responsibility for their actions. Because of this, the past repeated itself. Instead of looking for a way to sort themselves, they looked for a way to sort the current situation. They were stuck in the present, denied the past, and only saw a future in which the past didn't happen. And so, the repeat occurred. As the play is set in 1912, and the initial audience were from the 1940s, this repeat of something awful by not accepting and working from the past may remind them of the two great wars that had occurred since. They may consider how acceptance and responsibility incorporated themselves in the war, and how denial caused the repeat. They will look to Mr. and Mrs. Burling. Their denial is backed up with a blind view, which can be seen through Mr. Burling denying the chance of war. The fact that this old, middle-class man has been wrong on so many occasions and can't take responsibility may suggest to the audience that this type of person cannot be trusted. Instead, Priestley wanted the audience to look to Sheila and Eric, the younger generation, who accept responsibility and want to change themselves, not deny the past. By doing this as a socialist, Priestley has made the audience consider the views of the younger generation, and they will potentially look to them, seeing them as the more acceptable role models in society. Priestley presents responsibility through the middle class's views on the working class. Throughout the play, the inspector constantly references one individual, Eva Smith. Supposedly, each Burling family member has some connection to the girl. Towards the end of the play, however, Gerald comes up with the theory that each Eva Smith the family had interacted with was a different individual. This is backed up by the inspector's previous words. He states that there are millions of Eva Smiths. This could suggest that Eva Smith represents the working class. Keeping note of this, we can consider the idea that the Burlings and Geralds all see the working class as the same. They believe the inspector's claims that this was the same girl, despite little evidence. The inspector claimed this to make the Burlings show their true nature. They see the working class as the same. Perhaps this could suggest they see them as tools, simply another bolt in the structure of their own lives. If they break a bolt, they don't care, they replace it, it's a little thing. This mindset can be seen when Mr. Burling shows no compassion to Eva's death, and begins to deny responsibility for it. He won't take responsibility as he feels as if he did nothing wrong. To him, she is simply a tool, nothing more. He sees nothing wrong with his tool breaking, it's worth nothing to him. He was probably more concerned about replacing the tool than the death of the girl, or dealing with his own accusations in regards to her death. As a socialist, Priestley would have wanted to show this mindset of not seeing the incidents as an issue, to present the audience with the notion that the middle class cannot show compassion. They care nothing for the working class, only their labour. Upon seeing this message, a middle class audience member may grow scared. If the working class realise this lack of compassion, it could cripple them. They will look to solving this problem, starting with the acceptance of their workers and the mistreatment that they have given them. They will accept what they have done in order to show contrast between themselves and the Burlings.